Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 2nd of May, 2008, approximately 1 p.m. The interviewers are Mike Clark, God almighty, Mike Russert and Wayne Clark.
Mike Clark was with the birds.
Yeah, I know. Could you give me your full name, please? Your name, please.
Leslie Wood.
And when were you born? When were you born?
Sorry, I'm having trouble.
Okay.
You don't have to speak loudly.
Just
but
slow.
Slowly and
Okay.
distinctly.
When were you born?
Indian Lake, New York.
Okay, when?
1918, April 24th.
Okay. What was your education before you went in the service?
High school and a few individual courses.
Okay.
For instance, in GE courses.
All right. So did you work at GE
Yeah.
before you went in service?
Yes.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I was on my way to work. I heard it on the car radio.
Well, how did you feel when you heard about that?
Shocked, I guess, would be the word, and outraged.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, did you enlist or were you drafted?
My draft was coming up, and I selected the Navy.
Why did you decide on the Navy?
I had known some people who had been in the Navy and also some Army personnel, and the Navy appealed more to me.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it would be more to my way of life. And
Could you have gotten a deferment working at GE?
I beg your pardon.
Could you have not been drafted because you worked at GE?
No, I could be drafted. I wasn't on a sheltered job,
Oh, okay.
whatever you call it. But my boss down there had told me that he would like to know if my draft number was coming up. You know. But I didn't let him know until I had to appear for an interview.
Now, you were, what, 45 years old when you were drafted?
Yeah.
Wow.
Were you married?
I had been, and
No, he wasn't.
it didn't work. So
Oh, okay. So you must have been one of the oldest guys in your unit.
yeah, I was. I guess there were a few older than
He
me.
was born in 1918, so he would be 1828, 38. He'd be in his early 20s.
20, okay, 38. Okay, yeah, okay. Where did you go for your basic training?
Sampson in Finger Lakes area.
Okay, what was it like at Sampson?
Well, it was a typical boot camp, I guess, regimentation and a lot of drill and just getting used to military life. I had the good fortune of remaining at Sampson an extra 6 weeks, 3 months, I guess. I was assigned to a storekeeper school. So I was in Sampson from October in 1943 until the spring of 44 when I finished school.
What were some of the things you were learning there?
Well, we learned the Navy system of storing and accounting for material, spare parts, and that sort of thing. It was a general storekeeping education. Took into account the system of storing and dispensing material, keeping records, that sort of thing.
Where did you go from Sampson?
From Sampson, I went to Shoemaker, California, for receiving ship. And I was only there a short time when I was assigned to go to Hawaii, where I joined this CASU that I spent the rest of my time in. They were just forming at that time in California, in Hawaii. They started the nucleus of this outfit in California, but then went to California for the remaining period before we went to the Pacific, South Pacific.
Now, what is a CASU?
CASU was Combat Aircraft Service Unit.
So what did they do? What were their jobs?
Out in the islands,
Yes.
we repaired and serviced patrol bombers and bombers. We had mostly PB-4Ys and PV-2s. PB-4Y was known as I believe it was a B-24 in the Army. The Navy designation of PB-4Y was a 4-engine, was a big long-range bomber. And the PV-2 was a much smaller bomber. It was a patrol bomber, a shorter range. And we also serviced aircraft from other units that were that had been damaged or shot up or needed repairs or overhaul. We were not a major overhaul base, but we did have overhaul facilities and quite an extensive stock of spare parts. And of course, while we were there, we accumulated a boneyard, which we could salvage for all kinds of aircraft.
Now, what do you mean by a boneyard?
Planes that were beyond repair, that were put in this fenced-in enclosure where parts were salvaged. For instance, we had aircraft in there that were foreign to our outfit, but they had come in to use our facilities, and perhaps the plane was, well, not repairable or not worthwhile to repair. And it was placed in a boneyard. We used parts from it for other aircraft that used to come in for emergency service.
Now, what islands were you on?
Pardon?
What islands?
Tinian.
Tinian, you were on Tinian.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what were your living quarters like?
Initially, 2-man pup tents, shelter halves. And we graduated from that to 6-man pyramid tents, where we had more room. And eventually we got Quonset huts, where we had fairly comfortable quarters. And I think there were 20 men to a Quonset hut, and they were laid out in streets in a pattern, you know. So we were quite comfortable there.
What was your food like while you were there?
Initially, again, we were on key rations, and it was only a short period of time. And we graduated to C rations, and that was quite a treat. Then we were on C rations for some time until they got a galley set up. And once they got a galley set up, we started out having heated C rations. But it gradually improved, where we had our own bakery. We had bread and we had New Zealand billy goat, which was quite a treat, even though I don't like lamb. But we had the galley was almost across the street from our Quonset hut, and we were very good friends with most of the cooks and bakers. They used to come down to salvage parts from our boneyard to make projects of their own, you know, stainless steel and plexiglass and stuff like that that was unusable for anything else. So due to our good relationship with them, we had the first loaves of bread that came out of the new ovens. And this created quite a bit of jealousy among some of our other compatriots there. But we had, we used to get a hot loaf of bread occasionally out of the ovens, and we had big, I guess they were about gallon-sized cans of canned butter from, I think it was from Australia or New Zealand, and it was about like, well, it was real thick, real firm, but on hot bread it was pretty good. So we fared pretty well.
Now, did you wander around the island very much?
Did what?
Did you wander around the island, explore the island at all?
Yeah, we did some later on. There was some time before the island was secured.
So there were still Japanese there when you first landed?
Oh yeah, we went in with the Marines.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it was pretty rough at first, and once we got ashore, our unit took all our gear, our personal items and stuff like that. Of course, we each carried the shelter half for a pup tent. They were all loaded on a truck and taken inland to a secured area and thrown off the truck. And then we had to go up and find our own, and most of it by this time was about halfway down into the mud. So we had to dig for it. But once we got our shelter half set up, we were pretty comfortable. Of course, pup tents we had to crawl into, and usually you left your shoes and any other gear besides your clothing, you left outside. In the morning, you get up and wring it out and dump out your shoes, and you're all set for the day.
Was there a problem with like scorpions or spiders or snakes?
No, there were spiders, but I never had any problem with any of them. There were no snakes on Tinian, for which I was happy. But once we, later on in our tour, we had big Quonset huts with supplies and equipment in them. And we had racks, bins, all different sizes, and spiders used to make nests in there. Of course, the lights were up in the top of these buildings, and the bins were pretty dim. You couldn't see. You had to reach in and feel for things, and sometimes you reach in and get a hold of a spider about the size of your hand, and your legs sticking out, you know. It didn't give you a very comfortable feeling, but I never heard of anybody getting hurt or anything. Main thing was bees. We used to have bees, and we had some kind of ants that were ferocious, and we had quite a lot of trouble with them. You find a cleared area today where everything was clean, and you go there in the morning and it'd be a mound of dirt like that, full of these red ants. They'd move in overnight, and they weren't very friendly. Other than that, we had, as I said, no snakes or no scorpions or nothing of that nature.
Now, did you build a base from scratch, or did you use a Japanese, was there a Japanese
The only
airfield?
thing we used from Japanese was the old airstrips. We patched them up. They were pretty well bombed out.
Yeah.
We patched them up and got them airworthy so that some of our planes could land. And all our buildings, there was nothing left. So we had to start from scratch. And as soon as we got some of the airstrips usable, we started bringing in heavy equipment, bulldozers and backhoes and things like that. And that expedited the repair of the airstrips, and also gave us capability of leveling off and clearing away rubble and putting up buildings of our own.
How long was it before you were operational, approximately?
Oh, it's a matter of very few weeks, maybe 4 or 6 weeks. We had tents up for the motor mechs, and they were repairing planes and equipment almost immediately on a smaller scale. Of course, as time went on, we got big Quonset huts set up and more equipment in, and the activities expanded. The nearest overall base was in Guam. We used to get some supplies and equipment from Guam, but we were a forward air base, mostly for emergency repairs for other units, and of course operations for our own patrol duties.
Did you ever get any Air Force planes in? They had to make emergency landings?
I can't say definitely any particular ones, but we had planes from all kinds of units. We had, and we used to have squadrons come in, especially Marine squadrons would come in and set up tents and stay for maybe a week or whatever period was required to get their planes overhauled or serviced, whatever they needed, and they'd move on. But we had all sorts of units moving through our unit. They come in temporarily for emergency repairs and move on.
Now, what was it? You had dengue fever.
Yeah. I had dengue early in the tour. During the period we were living in 6-man pyramid tents. And I contracted this dengue, and I guess I was out of it for a few days because they took me to a first aid area, medical section, and I guess I was there 3 days before I came to. I knew where I was, or knew what was going on. I was pretty sick for a little while. I had good care. I was in they had a big tent set up, and they had people that needed treatment from all different units or all different functions of our unit were in there. The place was full of cots, and I guess we had pretty good treatment. First I knew, I woke up one morning and I had a hospital mate there was doing something for me. I woke up and I realized I was in a different place. I wasn't in where I expected to be, and so I got talking with him, and he told me that I'd been there 3 days, and told me where I was, you know, and all about it. That's the first I knew about it.
Now you said, you said sometimes it was boring and sometimes it was terrifying.
Yeah, it was, when it was business as usual, we just had work around our camp section there. We had several big Quonset huts with different types of supplies. My particular one was, I had one of these 100-foot Quonset huts with aircraft structural supplies. There were others with clothing and radio, radar, and you know, all the different functions. We had buildings for each different function. And normally we had just the routine business. People come in for parts, and we had the record keeping and that sort of thing to do when we issued material. And just that routine work was the more boring part of it. But we also had a lot of air raids, especially early on. We had air raids, daytime raids, we had mostly nighttime raids. And unfortunately, our warning system didn't always work the best. A lot of times the air raid sirens would go off, and everybody would head for their foxholes, and bombs were already dropping. And that was the terrifying part, because you could hear these planes overhead, sometimes a whole squadron of them. And you could hear those bombs coming down. They make a terrifying sound, and you're never sure where they're going to land. And so that wasn't a very comfortable feeling. But as time went on, we had big improvements in our air raid warning system, and more times than not, the planes never got through to our islands. We'd hear the air raid sirens go off, and our PA system would announce, almost like being at a racetrack, you know. The fighter planes were taking off. The enemy was still so many miles out, and our planes were taking off, and our planes are heading for the area where the, to bypass or to intercept the enemy. And then pretty soon they say contact had been made, and you look off to the north or east or wherever it might be, and you see this orange glow in the sky. If it was nighttime, it looked like the whole sky was lit up with this orange light, and that was the enemy. So they were very successful at intercepting these raids. And I understand from what they used to tell us about it that our planes would take off, and they get to a high altitude over the incoming enemy, and then when everything was right, they'd pounce on them, and that was it. And oftentimes they were, 6 or 8 miles out, but you could still see the glow from these burning planes.
Did you ever have to go out on patrols at all?
Any what?
Patrol, did you have to go out on patrol at all?
Oh yeah, we had patrols. You mean on the island?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we had patrols out, and early on, the patrols used to run into enemy patrols, and sometimes it was pretty hairy, but I guess our patrols had the capability of calling in help real quickly, and so we never had too much problem. The worst problem was these ambushes that were set up. The enemy patrols would set up an ambush situation on a road or path or whatever that was heavily used. And then when a group of our people would go through there, they would ambush them. And they had a system of short-range firepower. They had paper bullets. Normally the lead and copper bullet the fuse was removed from their cartridges, and a hard twisted paper bullet was inserted in the cartridge. And they were short range and they were pretty damaging. So we had some experience with that, but we soon overcame that problem, and it got to the point where there weren't, well, there just were no enemy patrols anymore. The enemy was all boxed in to one end of the island, and very rarely were able to break through. And if they did, it was only a few, you know, not enough to be damaging. And right up until I left there, they were occasionally picking up a stray, somebody that had gotten through, and they had survived by stealing supplies and living in caves and underground and things like that. The terrain of that island was such that anybody could live there forever, I guess, and not be detected. They were right up until just before I left, they were still picking up occasionally an enemy soldier. Most of them were in civilian clothes, and that was a problem telling them apart. But they had these compounds set up, and they tried to separate the military from the civilian. And these islands were fenced in, and the civilians, they tried to separate them, you know, as much as they could. And they took the male members of the civilian population and used to farm them out in working parties in different units, and the island could come down and bring a truck and some guards, and they'd pick up half a dozen or a dozen residents, former residents of the island, and take them back to the unit to do work, manual labor, you know, around the unit. We used to go down and get working parties, and we used to try to, our own particular unit, my supply division, used to try to keep the working parties at about 6 or 8 men. And we found they were easier to handle and guide into different jobs, projects and things. We used to go down oftentimes in the morning. It would arrange for a working party, go down, pick them up and bring them back to our unit. And we used to use them unpacking incoming supplies. As I mentioned, we had aircraft structural parts. And some of these are big. You can imagine a tail fin assembly, or, you know, doors and big panels and a lot of aircraft engines. Stuff came in boxed and crated, and we used to take these parties out and have them unpack this stuff. We get it unpacked, and we could label it and identify it and get it stored away where we could get at it and where we could take care of it and so forth. So these people were pretty useful, and most of them were very cooperative. I had one man on a working party I used to get, had been a former school teacher. Of course, he spoke no English, and I spoke no Japanese, but sign language is pretty effective sometimes. So he communicated to me with sign language and gibberish one time that would it be possible for the crew that we had there to come to our unit every time we needed a working party. We always get the same crew. And of course that wasn't the way it operated. The working parties were lined up behind a 10-foot page wire fence, and the trucks from the various units came down and they went up to the gate, and personnel there would take the next 6 men or whatever and assign them to whoever was there. But these guys would hang back. They wouldn't get in line until they saw our truck in the line. Then they'd get up there and try to manage to get at the gate the same time that we did. Then they get assigned to our unit. And this is something they had to do. And they were pretty successful at it. But I used to enjoy talking with this former school teacher because he was one of the more educated ones and more innovative in the sign language and so forth. He quickly became the honcho, the foreman of the crew. So anything we wanted done, we would communicate with him and make sure he understood what we wanted done, and he'd take the others and do it. So it worked out pretty good. And a lot of interesting things that he told me. For instance, one thing, he told me that when the Japanese military realized that invasion by the U.S. was imminent, he was assigned, this one character was a military wheel of some sort. He went around and instructed all his units to try to get the idea across to the citizens that once the U.S. invaded, they would be tortured or killed or something, you know. And he instructed all of them to either commit suicide. One of the things that was, he instructed them, if they had small children, to kill their children, throw them off a cliff. They had a lot of cliffs in some areas of this island, 40, 50 feet high, and they were instructed to throw their children off this cliff into the ocean. And well, all sorts of things like that. And this fellow said the ironic part of it was when they all got rounded up and put in these compounds, fenced-in compounds, they had supply areas where they had necessities that these people could go and get. And he said he went in there for something one day in this area, and the first person he ran into was this officer that had been instructing him to dispose of the children. And this made quite an impression. These rules applied to the others, but not to him.
Now, when you were on the base, what kind of uniform did you wear? What did you wear?
We wore these fatigues, these jungle green,
Like Marine Corps
like
fatigues?
olive
Or
green, short sleeve denim shorts and pants, these green pants, and regular work shoes with a composition sole.
Mhm.
They had trouble with shoes at first because the coral on the island would just chew the soles right off of normal shoes, like rubber or leather.
Mhm.
And I understood that they experimented with different compounds, and they came up with some sort of a compound sole that they put on shoes they issued to us out in the islands. They were a little longer duration. But mostly, most of us wore shorts. We had issue pants and cut the legs off and made shorts of them. The same way the shirts and shirt sleeves, cut the sleeves off. And a lot of them are cut off right at the shoulder seam, and some less. It was pretty informal. You saw all kinds of things. And we had, when we first went out there, of course, we wore helmets. Then after the enemy got rounded up and there were fewer of them around, we went to these pith helmets. You're wide brim to encounter the sun. Then most of us went to regular baseball caps after that. They had a long visor and shaded our faces, you know. But it was mostly baseball caps and those pith helmets and short sleeves and shorts.
Now, you mentioned that one of your friends or one of the men made an unusual wash machine.
I'm sorry.
You said someone made an unusual wash machine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. One of the guys, you saw all sorts of innovative things out there. One of the guys had salvaged a 55-gallon drum somewhere, and he cut the whole top out of it. And he salvaged a bicycle from somewhere on the island. He picked it up, found it. He used the sprocket, and he scrounged up a couple of regular plungers, plumber's helpers, and he attached these to the sprocket and attached the sprocket somehow to a small windmill device. He had a little framework going up, and he had windmill paddles on it. We most always had a pretty good breeze out there. Well, as this windmill would turn, the chain would drive the sprocket, and the sprocket would drive the plungers up and down. So they'd fill a drum of water, and everybody in his unit go and throw their clothes in that drum, and they just pound there all day. And at night, when they got back from work, they'd go and get their clothes out of there, wring them out, and hang them out to dry. It worked pretty good.
Now, were you there when they announced President Roosevelt's death?
When what?
When they announced the death of President Roosevelt?
Yes.
What was your reaction?
Well, I don't really remember. I guess we all wondered what was going to happen next. And it was every incoming president has his own ideas, and we all wondered if this would hasten the end of the war or prolong it. But, other than that, it didn't seem to have much effect on operations out there. Everything went along as it had been.
How about when you heard about the atomic bombs?
The atomic bomb went off our airstrip,
Okay.
and we, of course, none of us knew anything about it until afterwards.
Were you allowed to go near the plane or see the plane before it took off?
Oh, we didn't know it had a bomb on it. We had planes coming in and going out all the time, and we didn't know that this atomic bomb was on this plane or was even on our island until after it was dropped on Japan. And then, of course, the word came out that it had gone off Tinian, and then it narrowed down and it came off our airstrip. Then, as it turned out, the Enola Gay turned up in my boneyard.
Really?
Yeah. So it was, I had some pictures of it when they first brought it in.
What happened to it? Why did it end up in the boneyard?
I don't know. I don't know what did happen to it. Evidently, they thought it was no longer serviceable or worth repairing. I don't recall that we ever took any parts off of it, although we may have. It was a plane that was foreign to our unit, you know, it wasn't like the rest of the planes in our squadrons. But it was quite an attraction. We had guys from every unit in the island, I guess, coming over there to look at it. The name was painted right on it, and of course it had the symbol of all the missions that were painted on the side. It had quite a bunch of missions. I guess probably the plane was nearly worn out. Probably is why it was put in a boneyard.
Now you said one of the unusual things you had to do is become teachers at the end. You had to teach others how to take care of after the Japanese surrendered?
Yeah. When after the bomb was dropped and Japan surrendered, they froze a lot of rates, ones that were going to be needed to close these bases and, you know, the work that had to be done. And storekeepers were one of the ratings that were frozen. So we didn't feel very happy about that, of course, but there's nothing we could do about it. As time went on, they came up with this thought of training newer recruits to take over our jobs and send us home. So they asked for volunteers from our unit, or the storekeepers, to set up an area where they could instruct these peoples and these strikers in the duties that they had to perform and would be asked to perform. And so we did that, and we had I had about I don't remember now how many. It must have been 4 or 6 fellows that had just come into the unit, just come out there from the States. They were all seamen, and they were interested in striking for a storekeeper rating. So they were recruited for each of the areas in supply division, and the storekeepers in that division were giving them instructions in their particular line. So we had, I guess this class lasted for almost been a couple of months, something like that, and it ran, seems to me it ran several days a week. Take a couple hours, like before, you know, late in the afternoon. They'd meet over there, and we'd have discussion and so forth until we'd gone through whatever course we'd laid out for them, and in that way we were able to come home again.
When did you arrive back in the States?
Pardon?
When did you arrive in the States?
We arrived in the States, I think it was just after New Year's in '46. And we were given a month's leave. Well, initially we came in to the West Coast, of course, Alameda, and it was during the strike that Western Union and all the communications, the telephone companies, had a big strike. There were no communications, and we couldn't even call home. But after a while, after a few days, some arrangement was made. How, I don't know. But we were able to call, make a telephone call. And we were tied up there on the West Coast because of the strike. We couldn't make arrangements, couldn't buy tickets or anything to come home, you know. We were just stuck there. So it ran along, seems like it was 2 or 3 weeks, and something happened that somehow or other they got a breakthrough and were able to sell tickets, and we were able to buy tickets right on the base. And I had well, 6 to begin with. There were 6 of us storekeepers that came back together, and we were stuck there together. And then the 6 were from all over. A guy from Texas, or 2 guys from New York State. One was from Buffalo, and me from the Schenectady area, and others were scattered around. We were able to communicate somehow with our families, and we were able to buy tickets and be able to leave. We got leave papers, and I got assigned to Lido Beach, Long Island, with a 30-day delay en route. So I was able to come home for 30 days and go down to Long Island for discharge. So I guess these other fellows had the same conditions. You know, it was, you never knew where you're going to be tomorrow. But we made out all right.
After you were discharged, did you use the GI Bill?
No, I didn't. I wanted to, but I had this job and I had a family. My mother was dependent on me. She was getting along in years, and I had an uncle that was also with a great uncle. He was along in years, and I needed the income, so I went back to GE.
So you never used the 5220 Club?
What was that?
5220 Club.
Yeah,
Did you ever use it?
yeah. I was on that for until, well, from the time I got my discharge until I went back to GE, which was only, well, another thing, GE was on strike when I got home. And so I couldn't go right back to work. I didn't go back until I got my discharge in February, I believe, and I didn't go back to work till, I think it was the end of April or May, mostly due to the strike. So I used the 5220 during that period.
Okay.
I'd almost forgotten about that.
How do you think your time in the service changed your life? Or had an effect on your life?
Well, I'm sure it did. A lot of things I appreciated about the service. One was the spirit of cooperation and camaraderie. You know, I thought that was a great thing. It was a great equalizer. There was, when I first went in the Navy, there was this gap between the enlisted man and the officers, you know. And out in the island, you didn't see much of that. In fact, a lot of the time you didn't know whether the guy working alongside of you was a enlisted man or what. And it didn't matter. They had a job to do and you did it. But I liked that, and I think I learned a lot about different classes felt about each other, and were able to work together, cooperate. I think it also taught me more how to think about how the other fellow feels about something. You have your own opinions, and they're strictly your own. Somebody else has their own, and there's room for both. And I think that was one of the big things.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.